Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Soft Stories. I'm Stratton, and joining me today is Lyndsey Little. Lyndsey is an artist and comic author whose work has been featured in a number of publications, most recently the anthology Girls Who Love Monsters. Lyndsey proposed this challenge as a fun exercise, and I think it will certainly be fun to see how it turns out, even if the experience itself is trying, shall we say.
Probably more fun for them than fun for us.
Well, we'll see, won't we? So, we have arrayed in front of us our hot sauces as part of this challenge. I should explain that in the style of First We Feast's Hot Ones series, we have undertaken this endeavour. Lyndsey has worked hard to procure all of the hot sauces that you see in front of us, which I will introduce before we take part. We have sourced these little nuggets. I thought that would be simpler as I'm dealing with recording equipment than trying to eat sourced hot wings. And as I say,
more elegant too.
Yes, I think so. We have questions, some of which have been submitted by you lovely people. Thanks particularly to KR and GetGoB for their submissions, and from some of our personal friends and family who have submitted questions to this as well. So, before we get started, I guess we should introduce our first sauce, which is this one's here. It is Hedonist's classic garlic Fresno edition. And let's jump right in.
I'm really excited about that one.
Me too, it sounds delicious. So that's this one here.
Okay. Do you want to clink?
Clink. I should say that we both have dairy-based beverages in front of us. I have full-fat milk, and Lyndsey has full cream, which I think is very brave. It may pay off. We'll see how that goes. I may be stealing it as we go forward. So this does smell lovely and garlicky, doesn't it? The classic hot sauce comes in at just 1700 Scoville units, which is pretty mild, particularly as we get up into some of these higher reaches. But it does have a little bit of heat on the back end. What did you think?
My taste buds must be burned from all of the years of spicy foods because I didn't taste the heat from that one at all.
Well, that bodes well for future nuggets that we'll be eating. I will say quickly before we get to our first question what the Scoville unit is. If you're familiar with the Hot Ones series, they mention it a lot, but haven't really explained what it means. So Scoville units were devised by a scientist called Scoville. I believe it was Henry Scoville, but I might be wrong there. And they are a measure of flavor intensity, capsaicin intensity. And the way that the Scoville scale is measured is for each unit of Scoville, it takes 1 part of water to neutralize that flavor. So if something is just a 1 on the Scoville scale, then a single drop of water will mean that you can't detect any of the capsaicin in it. So as we get higher, it's going to take thousands and thousands of parts of water per 1 part of whatever hot sauce it is to neutralize that capsaicin. So that's what it is going forward. Now, Lyndsey, I have a question for you.
All right.
This was asked by our good friend Khalid, and the question is, would you prefer to be instantly 10 years younger or have $1 million in the bank?
I'm going to say 1 million. Purely because I'm hoping that if I live long enough, I can pay to be 10 years younger as well.
Oh, interesting.
I just want it all. I want my cake and I want to eat it too.
I think there's a lot in that question that leaves it open to interpretation. Would you be going back in time 10 years with all your memories? Would you just be de-aging? I would feel a bit odd if we were in a relationship and you were suddenly 10 years younger.
I would pay for you to be 10 years younger with me.
Thank you so much. I hope it only costs $500,000 each. Do you have a question for me?
Yes. How old is your dog and what is their cutest habit?
For those of you who have been with the channel for a while, you have probably seen my usual co-host, Pepper, who sits behind me and sleeps throughout the entire recording. She is a little Lhasa Apso mix that we adopted earlier in 2020. She was a stray, so we don't know exactly how old she was when she was found, but we believe that she's quite young, about 1.5 years old. So maybe she was born in June or July in 2019. As for her cutest habit, she does this really lovely thing where when it's time for us to go for a walk, I get the lead and bring it over to her, and she waggles around and then flops onto her belly, which makes it very easy to clip the lead on. I find that very cute. Do you have a cutest habit of
Yes,
Pepper's?
I love when she barks in her sleep.
Oh, that is very cute.
And it's not her usual bark. Normally her bark is a lot bigger than she physically is, but when she barks in her sleep, it sounds like a squeaky toy. It's like, yip, yip, that sort of thing.
All right, shall we move on to source number 2? All right, so source number 2 is Hoi Fong Foods Sriracha hot chili sauce. Classic and a favorite. This bottle was not purchased for this experiment. We have had sriracha forever.
Clink.
Clink. Again, a very pleasant sauce. Not much in the way of heat, but good flavour. I find this one maybe a little bit more complex flavour-wise than the first.
I wanted to taste more of the first one. It smelled really good. I think maybe we just needed more of that sauce.
Yes, we have judiciously dolloped onto these nuggets.
I think you did enough of a dollop, but maybe, like for this anyway, for these purposes.
Well, luckily we have the rest of the bottle to get through. There's a little sweetness to sriracha as well, which I quite like.
It tastes just as I remembered.
Now, question number 2 for you, Lyndsey. Jasmine asked, would you rather take a trip to space or explore the depths of our own ocean?
They're both terrifying, but for some reason I'm a little bit more terrified of going into space.
Interesting. So it's not something that you would jump at the opportunity to do either way?
Not after. I would need a lot of training.
Sure.
It's hard
yes,
to.
That's a good
it's
point.
hard to. ASMR voice. It's hard to imagine either one of these scenarios without intensive training. So maybe after intensive training in either field, I might feel. I don't know why I'm getting scared just thinking about either of those.
Do you have a question for me?
Yes. Do you have any more pets?
So in addition to Pepper, we have a cat. Her name is Pancake. She is very cute and can be quite loud herself sometimes. Occasionally she will meow at the door of our office while I'm recording soft stories.
She loves to be in the office.
Where she can make the most trouble. It's full of cords and expensive laptops. And
there's lots of nooks and crannies to get into. We have a guest bed in the office, which is where Pepper sleeps when she's in the Soft Stories videos, and Pancake, she likes to try to crawl under the blankets of the bed, which is already made. So that in itself is like a very messy interest of hers.
Yes, it's definitely hard to both have to wash the sheets after someone stays and before someone stays, because between Pepper and Pancake rummaging around in the bedclothes, it is no longer a clean bed by the time the next person gets here. All right, source number 3, which brings us to Heartbeat Hot Sauce Company's Pineapple Habanero. This one increases the Scoville level quite considerably. We've jumped from 2,200 with the Sriracha to 12,200 with this one. I am intrigued. We smelled this one before, didn't we? And liked the sort of fruity
I don't have
scent
fruity
of it.
sauces that often, so I'm excited about this one. This is weak sauce.
It's interesting, isn't it? It definitely doesn't have the strength of flavour to overcome the natural chicken taste, does it? I wonder whether if you were to dip something
I bet it would
into...
be really good in a fish taco.
Yes, that would be nice, with a subtler flavour, maybe. These nuggets are quite heavily seasoned, which may interfere with our...
We'll probably be glad of that later on.
I suspect so. So, Lyndsey, for you, Victoria asked whether there were any television shows or movies that you enjoyed as a child that have really had a lasting impact on you.
Probably the live action films, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the sequel, Secret of the Ooze.
In what way have they had a lasting impact on your life?
I obsessively watched them as a kid. Apparently that's how my dad would get me to sleep when I was very young. And it's probably what started my love of anthropomorphic monster type creatures. It probably contributed to that anyway.
That's very interesting. Your most recent project, your ongoing project, is a, careful around the eyes, as Sean Evans would say, is an online comic, hopefully eventually to be a physical comic as well, about anthropomorphic and other monsters. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As Stratton said, I have been working on a webcomic called Oni Girl, and it's about a half-human, half-Oni girl who goes to a school for monster children. And the intent is that they learn how to act more human so that they can blend into human society and continue to survive in a world where humans have sort of overrun the world. And I deal with topics like anxiety and issues with self-esteem, and I use monster characteristics as sort of symbology for that, just the outward rejection one might feel towards themselves, or how society might reject someone.
Fascinating.
I hope that made sense.
I think that made perfect sense, and it's a great explanation. I hope we'll dive a little deeper into your work as we go forward. But
if you're interested in checking it out, it would make me very happy.
Do you have a question for me?
Yes. What is your favorite dessert?
That is a difficult question. I was always big on sweets as a child, and so there are a lot of desserts that are special for me in one way or another.
For nostalgic reasons.
But I think my favorite is one that my mother made a lot for us because it was one of my father's favourites, which is rhubarb crumble. And a crumble is sort of like a pie without a shell. It's usually made in a ramekin as opposed to in a shallow dish. And it has that crumbled oat mixture on top. And the rhubarb is a strong flavour that has elements of sweetness and sour. It's a little bitter. And with the crumble, it adds texture and crunch. It's a very holistic dessert in a way that I really like.
Good answer.
Shall we move on to wing number 4? Now, this is a sauce that also is quite familiar to us. One that we have tried many times before. This is from Bravado Spice Company. It is their ghost pepper blueberry hot sauce.
I've eaten this sauce for many years now, and my favorite thing to eat it on is pizza.
At 28,000 Scoville units, it's more than double the heat of the last sauce.
And we've had this one before. We know we can withstand
We
this
certainly can. We're safe up to this point, I think. But from here on out, it is uncharted territory. Clink.
Clink.
A very tasty sauce. I think that there is a little bit more of a bite to the nasal passage as you eat this one. And I definitely feel the heat a little bit more.
I'm sniffling a little more.
But the sweetness of the blueberry does come through, and I think it's very helpful.
It goes really nice with the savory element.
Very tasty indeed. So, for you, Lyndsey, question from Tialek. If you could be a witness to any moment in the past, what would you go watch as a passive observer? So not interacting with anyone in the past, but just...
I wouldn't want to watch a traumatic historical event because it would be terrible to watch and not do anything about it. I would like to solve one of the world mysteries. So perhaps, I was going to say, see how the pyramids were made, but then I would be witnessing slavery.
Well, that's an interesting fact because the pyramids actually weren't made by slaves.
No?
No, pyramids, at least the Egyptian pyramids, I can't speak to the Mesoamerican or other Chinese pyramids. But in Egypt, the Great Pyramids were constructed by seasonal labourers, farmers or other labourers who
I think you did tell me that at some point.
were well recompensed either in additional grain that they were provided for their farming seasons or in beer and lodging and even in money. So it is a great myth that the pyramids were constructed by slave labor.
Perfect. That's what I want to do then.
Fantastic. Good choice. I think it would be fascinating to see ancient Egypt at the height of its power.
What about you?
Oh, I think that's a great one. The idea of solving a historic mystery is quite compelling. And I've always been fascinated with the Jack the Ripper story and who he really was. And I believe there are several very solid theories out there as to who Jack the Ripper was. So maybe I don't want to, A, experience seeing a murder in person and not being able to do anything about it, and B, maybe that's already been solved.
Stonehenge would be good.
Stonehenge would be very interesting to see. I think I'd really enjoy seeing some of those great moments of history, like the moment when Caesar re-entered Rome after crossing the Rubicon, and seeing that moment when the Republic began to grind to a halt and the empire began to be built up. I know that's a very Eurocentric answer, and I'm sure that there are many moments that would be equally as powerful throughout world history, but that's one that always stood out to me.
It's hard to find a moment in history that wasn't problematic in some way.
Unfortunately so. Do you have a question for me?
Yes. Do you have any advice for those who wish to read more but have difficulty focusing or finding time to do so?
The problem with finding time to read is one that I think we all do grapple with. And it really comes down to making reading a priority for you. And it's very easy for us, and I know that I myself fall into this trap a lot, to begin a cycle of work, travel, food, mindless entertainment, and then sleep and repeat again. So carving out that time to be mindful and thoughtful in what we're doing by engaging with something a little bit more taxing mentally than just sitting and watching television is difficult. But I think that finding a time that is good for you, so saying that I'm going to read for half an hour before dinner every day, or finding a time just before you go to bed to sit down and unwind and turn off distracting devices and find a time to focus, I think is important for something like that. As to actually focusing on it, I find that music can be very helpful. I find that words in music, lyrics, distract me. So instrumental or electronic music that is of a lower tempo and calmer vibe. I listen to a lot of lo-fi music when I am reading or trying to help get my mind into a mood where there are fewer external distractions, and I think that's important.
Good advice.
Thank you. All right. Source number 5. This is another from the Hot Ones collection made by Hedonist. This is the Los Calientes hot sauce. It comes in at 36,000 Scoville units. I'm actually going to turn mine over so that I get more of the sauce on my tongue. I'm wondering if it's that reason that we're not tasting it as much as we should do. So let's see how that goes.
You're a brave one. I like the flavor of that one.
Yes, we're definitely ramping up in spice a little bit more. It's not to the point where it is unbearable, but certainly noticeable.
There's definitely a lot more heat on my tongue, so
But still a flavorful sauce, quite nice.
I like it.
All right, from John, a question for you, Lyndsey. I guess a question for both of us. You're both artists, but from what I've seen in your own unique styles, have you ever seen one work of the other person's that inspired you to create a work that you're proud of?
So I do have an answer to this question, and I do love this question. So I don't know if your viewers know this, but Stratton is the dungeon master in our D&D group, and that's actually how we met, was through D&D. So D&D is very significant as for individuals and as a couple. So I painted a mural outside in our patio area based on a setting from one of Stratton's campaigns, which takes place in the Feywild.
It is a really lovely piece that I am very happy when I get to look at every day. It's on our exterior wall that separates our home from the next home across, so it's visible as people enter our home area, and people comment on it a lot.
It's very sweet.
It's a brightening of our space that I really do enjoy. It's beautiful. As to the other side of the equation, I think that Lyndsey's work is inspiring to me in a couple of respects. If we're talking about my my artistic or creative pursuit of being the dungeon master for our Dungeons and Dragons game, her characters have inspired me to add elements to our story and to grow the story in ways that I don't think it would have otherwise. But I do also find myself personally inspired by her work ethic and art.
That's
Seeing the work that she does and the effort and time that she puts into it is greatly inspiring to me, and it's one of the reasons why I took the time to restart this channel, because I was looking for a way to
making me
become
teary-eyed.
more engaged creatively after seeing the satisfaction and joy that it brought her. So the fact that Soft Stories is back is partly thanks to Lyndsey. Very inspiring.
so sweet. I'm such a sap.
Do you have a question for me?
Yes. What has been your favorite story to read so far, and what story are you most looking forward to sharing in the future?
That is a good question. In terms of my favorite story that we've read so far, I think that it's got to be The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. They were stories that brought me great joy when I was a high school student, which is when I read them the first time in my school library. And they inspired a lot of what I think is good about the person that I am today in terms of critical thinking and reliance on
Facts.
yes,
Logic.
logical deduction over allowing other aspects of my personality, as valid as they may be, to rule the way that I live my life. And I just think that they're great stories as well. They are succinct but expansive and great fun to read. So I'm definitely looking forward to sharing more of them in the future as well. We've just done the adventures, but the casebook, the memoirs, and the novels will all come in time. As to other books that I'm looking forward to reading, the one that comes to mind is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I have a great fondness for the work of Oscar Wilde, and I think that that book would be a great fit for soft stories. So look out for that one as well. I might wait a little while until after we've finished Emma to do another Victorian novel of that type, but I look forward to doing it. Source number 6 on our list is Torchbearer Sauce's Headless Horseradish, which is this one right here. This sauce I have been particularly looking forward to trying because it has the most amazing colour and viscosity to it. I don't know whether the size of the dollop that I've got on my nugget is a mistake or not, but we will soon see.
Clink.
Clink. I can definitely taste the horseradish on
I
that
can
one.
too. I love horseradish.
the heat of it is definitely coming through, and it is hitting me in a different place than I think some of the others have. Just sort of right in my throat.
I'm feeling that too. Yeah, so we haven't even touched our milks yet, so I think we're doing pretty well.
I have been consciously trying not to. I keep going for it as a way to clear my throat or help me out a little, but for whatever reason I thought I would save it for these later sources.
I'm saving mine too.
I'm definitely feeling that heat on my tongue. Again, I turned it over so that the sauce contacted my tongue, and my salivary glands have definitely activated in a way that they haven't done from any of the other sauces so far. This one was stronger than the last, but not in a jump that really seems too much. 36,000 Scoville units for Los Calientes to 52,000 for the headless horseradish. I think we're just about reaching the end of sauces that I would put on something just for the pleasure of it, for the pleasure of the taste. I could see myself adding this to maybe pork chop or something. I think the horseradish in there and the spice would be quite
really
good
nice.
for that, but I'll be interested to see what comes up for the future sauces and whether we like the flavour of those or whether they're just heat.
So I just wanted to add real quick. There's this wing place that we eat from really frequently. It's very close to where we live. And for some reason, I always go for the spiciest flavor they have on the menu. And it destroys me every time I eat it, but it's so delicious. And I've been wondering where on the Scoville level it would fall. And so far, I think this is the closest.
I think it would probably fall just between Los Calientes and the headless horseradish in terms of what I recall. I don't eat it nearly as often as you do, but from what my mouth is doing, I'm experiencing something similar.
And that one, it's a horrible but delicious experience at the same time. You sort of have to suffer through it.
And that's sort of the joy of hot sauce as well, isn't it? The pleasure that comes from pain, the release of the endorphins and the dopamine rush that you get from it. I think so.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the reason why we're here is to answer questions. And so we have one from David. What is a subject, e.g. a game, novel, movie universe, fandom or setting that you two disagree about passionately?
That we disagree on? Oh, okay. So the only thing I can think of is there's a couple of anime films we've watched together that I was sort of satisfied with the plot line and the ending, but Stratton found things to pick apart, I think. One of them was Paprika and the other one was Your Name.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really good example of that. And maybe it is that element of me that we were talking about earlier where I can't just shut my mind off and enjoy something. And I don't mean to say that those films require you to stop all critical thinking and only enjoy them for the pretty colours, because I don't think that's the case.
You wanted all of the questions to be answered.
Or I think that both of those films left gaps in the internal logic of the universe which were not satisfyingly addressed or even lampshaded in the story. There were elements that would change the plot completely if they had been addressed, and there was no reason why they weren't. So that was the thing that stuck for me in a way that made me enjoy them less than perhaps I could have done.
You're probably not going to like Donnie Darko then.
Okay. I have still never seen Donnie Darko.
And we've been planning to, so
We have.
it'll be interesting to see what you think of that.
I look forward to it. Yeah, I think that's a good answer to that question.
All right, on to the next nug.
Do you have a question for me?
I guess. So, do you have any hobbies outside of reading?
We have already mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, which I have been interested in for a long time and playing actively for about 5 years now, both as a player and as a game master. That is sort of my primary hobby outside of reading and doing this channel. And it sort of has a couple of little ancillary hobbies that go along with it. There's some writing involved. I make my own terrain pieces for
You should really see them. They're great.
for the games, which is something I enjoy doing. We'll often sit in the office and I'll be painting something while Lyndsey is working on an art project or the next comic page in your series, and listening to a podcast together. It's a good way for us to spend time. I think that podcasts, if they can be called a hobby, are another one of mine.
I think that could be considered a hobby.
Whenever I'm walking Pepper or out at the rock climbing gym.
Which is another hobby.
Yes, good point. I always have a podcast in my ears that sort of is the background to my daily life. I love learning new things and find them a great way to simultaneously entertain and enlighten me. So I like those a lot.
Board games are another big hobby.
Board games, yes. Just on the other side of this camera, we have our board gaming shelf, which is full of games that we play with just the two of us, with our friends, and even some one-player games that I can play by myself. Hobby board games are something that I've been interested in even longer than I have Dungeons and Dragons, and maybe that's the reason why I got into D&D in the first place.
Yeah, I can see that.
Good point. Shall we move on?
Let's.
All right. So, our next is another local source, Bravado Spice Company, who did the Blueberry Ghost Pepper, have also done a Black Garlic Carolina Reaper hot sauce. This one comes in at 71,000 Scoville units. And here we go.
Cheers.
Cheers indeed. We have definitely reached the point where the nuggets are no longer warm from the oven, and that may affect our ratings of these sauces. I liked that one. It hasn't really hit me in terms of the heat of it yet.
I sort of feel it in the back of my throat. It's slowly building up there. Especially when I swallow. And it spreads.
Yes, as I say, this is a local sauce to us. They are made, I believe, here in Houston, Texas, where we're recording from.
I liked the flavor, though. It's a little smokier.
Yeah, the black garlic is a really lovely flavor. I have done roasted black garlic bulbs before, and you just eat them by themselves, and the roasting and the olive oil reduce the hit of the garlic and the tang of the bitterness of it in a way that is really pleasant. I highly recommend.
Is it time for a question?
I think so. Another differing subject from David. Discuss a differing food opinion that you are both on opposite sides of. That's an interesting one. I know that you have a much higher tolerance of sweet foods than I think I do. There is As I mentioned, I had a sweet tooth, a very big sweet tooth as a child that has lingered into adulthood. But
I'm basically a sugar gremlin and can tolerate any amount of sugar. I will say that my adult palate has grown as I've gotten older, but I can still tolerate high levels of sugar more than you can.
is there anything, any flavor or food that you like that I don't, or that I do that you don't?
I think we're both really adventuresome with food. If anything,
Evidenced by the fact that we're doing a hot sauce challenge.
exactly. But if anything, I tend to like sweets more than you do. You prefer saltier things more than I do, probably. And also, I like licorice. Okay.
That's a good point.
You
Yes, I do.
love
Black licorice is one of my
licorice.
favourite sweets. I would also say that mangoes. I don't like
I
mangoes.
love mangoes.
Not my thing.
So there you go, David.
Do you have a question for me? And I'm going to take a sip of my milk now.
Oh. You broke down before I heard it.
No shame in it, as Sean Evans says.
I know. Okay. Do you have any plans on reading The Great Gatsby on the channel as it's entering the public domain in 2021? Ooh, that would be great too. Because I read recently that we're about to enter another sort of roaring 20s. And The Great Gatsby would be symbolic of that.
I think that's an excellent idea. The Great Gatsby is one that I had not really considered reading on the channel because it is such a quintessentially American novel, and my accent is very much not quintessentially American. I worry that...
Why don't you put on an accent?
Well, I have put on accents for books that I've read in the past, and I try to differentiate the voices of the characters as much as possible. But I worry that an affected series of accents like that might detract from
I can see
the
that.
book themselves. And I don't know whether that's something that I really should be afraid of, whether it will be detrimental, but it's one of the reasons why I have been a little reticent to do more books like The Great Gatsby.
I think those are good points. Leave a comment below. I don't think anybody would be offended if you just read it in your own normal voice. You're probably safer that way than to put on an accent.
Yeah, I would be fascinated to hear if any of you out there have thoughts on that subject. I'd love to hear about it. Okay. Now, this is the big one. If you have ever seen the Hot Ones series, this is the one that everyone complains about. We are moving on to Spicin' Foods de Bomb, Beyond Insanity.
This is the one I'm a little afraid of.
This one jumps from the 71,000 Scoville units of the Black Garlic Carolina Reaper to a whopping 135,000. Let's see how it goes.
Clink.
Clink.
Oh my gosh.
That is definitely a much more serious hot sauce than any of the ones that have come before. It is unpleasant. It's acidic and acrid.
This one sucks.
I can see why it is the one that gets the reactions the most on the show. And I am definitely having a reaction to it. It is coating my mouth in a way that is very unpleasant.
do we move on from this?
We have to grin and bear it. For there are still 2 sources to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lyndsey, unfortunately, I have run out of 3 written questions for you, and so I will have to come up with one myself, unless you would like to offer me a question and you can recover.
I have one last question over here.
Sure.
What classic novel would you recommend that everyone read at least once in their lifetime? My eyes are so teary right now.
A classic novel that everyone should read at least once. I think that there are many answers to this question. And I don't know that there is a right answer. For me, a book that
So sorry.
really continues to be relevant and continues to be meaningful would be The Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I think that it is a story of coming of age and dealing with loss and disappointment that remains powerful for me even today. I think that Dickens is a great writer and remains very readable in the way that some authors from the 19th century and before don't. So I would recommend Great Expectations. I would have trouble recommending anything from the classical period just because they are written in a way that is more functional than descriptive. I have read excellent translations of the Odyssey and the Iliad, but many of them take some artistic license with the language to make it more palatable to modern readers. And there is a conversation to be had there about how important it is to stay true to the original work. So if you want something that you know that you are probably going to enjoy and will be recognizable as literature, I think that Great Expectations is an excellent one for that.
Do you want an actual tissue?
No, I'm fine, thank you. Lyndsey.
That was horrible.
That is pretty bad.
All for you.
It has already been asked whether there are any TV shows or movies that have continued to inspire you. But are there any works of literature that you think remain a great inspiration for you in your work, for instance?
That's a good question. I think because my work is a comic, I'm probably more inspired by other comics because it's telling a story both with words and visuals. So the one that's really coming to mind is Mars by Fuyumi Soryo, which I think it was made in the 80s or 90s, but it was my favorite manga when I read it as a teenager, and to this day it's still one of my favorites. But I just really loved how emotionally impactful it was, and I like to think that I carry some of that into my work, or hopefully will. I don't know.
Great answer.
Oh, thanks. I feel like I'm half coherent right now.
Oh, are you half... is the half of you that's coherent enough to have another?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm ready for it.
All right, we are moving on to our 9th source. This is by Karma Sources and is called Burn After Eating. The Scoville units on this source are 669,000. 1,000, an increase of about 400% from the bomb.
Oh my god. Clink, I guess.
That actually has a very nice citrus taste.
I was thinking the same thing.
It hasn't hit me yet in the same way that the bomb did.
I feel a slow build up of it.
I can feel it too.
For some reason, the back of my teeth and my gums are hurting a little. I did not expect that. It's weird how each of these sauces targets different areas of your mouth or your throat. And we've got all of them to target all of the areas of our mouths and throats.
Yes, that was definitely less painful than the bomb. I didn't feel as incapacitated by that sauce as I did the previous one.
Except for me with my aching gums on this.
You poor thing.
It'll be fine. No, it's really weird. I'm afraid I've run out of questions on this side.
Well, not a worry. Lyndsey, you mentioned that your most recent work, your ongoing work, Only Girl, is a comic. Why did you choose that format to tell what you have mentioned previously is a very personal story for you?
I don't really consider myself a writer per se. But I do feel comfortable in telling stories in a visual way. And I felt like a comic was the only way to really tell this story. Because I'm not a writer, I'll just say that.
I think that's an interesting point. And your use of folkloric characters and monsters to talk about our own internal human struggles makes a lot of sense in that respect as well. To visually represent those struggles may be easier.
It's not really something that hasn't been done before. You see it all the time in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as we mentioned earlier. They fight crime, but they keep themselves hidden in the sewers so that people can't see them, and sometimes they struggle with that. Phantom of the Opera is one of my favorite examples of a quote-unquote monster who is really pitiable. You just see tons of that. Frankenstein's monster. And I think people like monsters for the visual appeal that they have, but also because we can sympathize with them, or maybe even identify with them. And I hope that people will do the same with my monster characters. Yeah, that's that's all I can think of.
Good answer. Is there something you wanted to ask me, or should we move on to our final?
Oh, I do have a question. Have you ever thought about writing a piece of fiction yourself? I say specifically fiction because I think if I imagine you writing something, that's probably the most likely genre.
It is something that has occurred to me, and I am very drawn to historical fiction. One of my great literature loves from a more modern period than I have covered on the channel is Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, which is all about the beginnings of the Gothic style in England in the 1200s, and showing those human moments in a different time period. So I have toyed with the idea of writing a maybe novella or maybe more a sort of like pulp paperback, Penny Dreadful style book.
You do love to read those.
I do. They are, if we're thinking about ways to get yourself into reading, something like that is short, sweet, action-packed, and moves very easily from page to page is a great way to remain focused on a book and to feel that sense of accomplishment when you finish something. Working on a 600-page tome is going to be a much more daunting task than just trying something a little smaller. So I highly recommend that if you're looking to get more into reading. But I think that would be a good format for a piece about pre-Norman England, the Anglo-Saxon period is fascinating, and I don't feel as though there's much literature about that. There are plenty of academic literature, but not much
Historical fiction
literature about that time. People think more about the medieval period when they think of Old England. So I think that would be interesting to explore a little bit more.
I think that's a great idea.
So we are down to our last wing. Not wing, nugget.
We've watched
I have
too many
watched it.
Hot Ones.
Yes, we certainly have. Now it's time for the final source that we have, which is also by Hedonist from their Hot Ones collection. This is The Last Dab Apollo, which is made by made from the Apollo pepper, which I
Never
believe
even heard of
is
that one.
made by the gentleman who is also the genius behind the Scorpion pepper and the Carolina Reaper. This sauce is said to be more than 2 million Scovilles. So we'll see how it goes. Clink.
Rest in peace. I felt it in my nose.
This one hasn't hit me quite yet, but I have a feeling it's coming. It is slowly spreading around my mouth in a way that...
It's creeping up.
Again, not nearly as...
This should be called the creeper.
Not nearly as instant an effect or as dramatic an effect as the Da Bomb sauce, which I think derives most of its power from chili extract liquid rather than from the chilies themselves, which may
They just cut out the
explain
middleman.
the immediate effect, because it's the liquid that fills your mouth much more quickly. But my eyes are definitely tearing up, and I can feel the sauce beginning to run down my throat. It's definitely a hot sauce. How are you feeling now that we have experienced our final sauce?
That was actually pretty doable. I think the heavy cream is the way to go for sure.
The milk helps while it is in my mouth, but as soon as I swallow the milk, there is enough capsaicin lingering in there to mean that it is not a long-lasting remedy. Perhaps the heavy cream coats the mouth a little more and helps with that.
You want to try it?
Oh, sure. Are you interested in trying some regular milk, or you're beyond that?
I'm beyond regular milk. Is it more helpful?
It's definitely tasty.
Well, we did it.
We certainly did. Congratulations to you, Lyndsey.
Oh, well, congratulations, Stratton. We've eaten some of the spiciest sauces in the world.
We certainly have. We've done well, I think. If any of you have watched Hot Ones, you know that the reactions on that show can be extreme. And I think for the most part we've done a pretty good job of keeping our heads.
I thought I would be crying. I thought
I would be in much more pain as well.
I thought you would be hiccuping.
Yes, that's a good point. Usually when I eat spicy things, I do start to hiccup. I'm glad that hasn't happened now. It would interfere with the audio pretty significantly.
Would have been cute, though.
So, as we have run out of questions, there is not much left to do, but thank you all for joining us this time on Soft Stories for a very different experience than our usual fare. But we will return to reading next week with a new book on Tuesdays and Emma on Fridays. Before we go, Lyndsey, where can people find you online?
So sweet of you to ask. So you can read my comic, Oni Girl, at onigirlcomic.com. And you can find my art at Instagram. Just go to lyndsey.little and you'll be able to see previews of my Oni Girl comic pages as well as other illustrative work. That's pretty much it.
Fantastic. And you can subscribe to this channel for more soft stories. If this is the content you're looking for, then please head over to the First We Feast YouTube channel and check out their series Hot Ones. It is highly entertaining and very informative. The host Sean Evans does great interviews and we heartily recommend their content.
We're such big fans.
We certainly are. So thank you for the idea, First We Feast, and thank you all for joining us this time on Soft Stories.
Thanks for watching us suffer.
Until next we meet, I wish you all the best and goodbye.
Happy holidays.